Welcome back to the Roaring Women's Podcast. Today we have Mary discussing women's role in society. So Mary, can you tell us what it was like to have a woman's role in society?
Well, we were expected to raise children, keep the house clean, and also provide emotional support for our husbands, but middle-class women often felt like they were being pulled in two different directions at the same time. Many women decided to take a job outside of the house, and these were mostly at textile mills because that's just what women were offered. But sometimes they overcame the barriers of society and gained professions in law and medicine.
Now, how did women spend their free time?
Well, most evenings just included parties and movies if they didn't have a job, but obviously it was a day job. And they also were expected to keep up with the latest appearances in fashion and in hairstyles.
Interesting. Now, what changed about women going into the 1920s?
Well, in August of 1920, the 19th Amendment was passed, and this was huge for women because it granted women all the right to vote in all elections.
So did women rebel against their stereotypes and expectations?
Well, women normally felt exploited no matter their social status or their race or level of education, and many working women responded to their absurd demands by rebelling against the authority in the workforce, but flappers also stayed independent and pushed for economical, political, and social freedoms, but more about that later.
Now, can you tell us about the New Woman Group?
Well, the New Woman Group was a feminist ideal that pushed against the limits put on them by society. Middle-class women focused their time and energy and resources on trying to improve the lives of women as a whole. This included dressing how they wanted, behaving how they wanted, and many of them cut their hair. Many women also stayed unmarried because they wanted to advocate for women's independence having nothing to do with men. One important person was Margaret Sanger. She opened the first birth control clinic in New York, and this gave women a lot of rights by allowing them the freedom to buy birth control. But not all women agreed to this, as some women saw traditional feminine roles as satisfying and empowering.
Okay, thank you for your time, Mary. I feel very informed.
Talking to us next, we have Tom, and he's going to tell us what flappers are and how women define the Roaring 20s. So Tom, what are flappers and what do you think about them?
Well, flappers are young women that dress in provocative ways. They are energetic and happy, and a symbol of the current time, of course. They're unique and have revolutionized the views on women, and now they are more independent and respected, which is a change for good.
That's really cool. So some people consider today's world as the jazz age. What does that mean?
Well, during this time, jazz is something that is extremely popular, and it attracts all public, especially flappers, who usually dance their iconic move, the Charleston. Jazz was sounding everywhere during this time, which you can't help but dance towards it.
Now, what difference have the flappers made in popular culture?
Well, flappers had changed the whole view on women during the time, giving themselves a charismatic personalities and a risky lifestyle. As they opposed to priorly established women roles by smoking and drinking, and generally being more independent than any other women group prior to this.
That's really cool. Thank you, Tom, for your time.
So our next speaker here is Marie, and she's going to be discussing the roles of women in the 1920s.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yep. I know we have discussed the roles of women in society, but what was a woman's life during the 1920s?
So women became more involved in society. From politics to the workforce, women took a huge step towards equality and freedom during this time period.
Why was the flapper look so important?
The flapper look fought against sexism and influenced the children of the time. This influence led to slang being used, which we still use today.
And who helped define this era?
Women like Amy Semple McPherson, Alice Paul, as we mentioned before, Margaret Sanger, and many more all influenced the 1920s in their own special ways. Amy broke many stereotypes for both women and people of color through her evangelical speaking. Her revival meetings were available for whites and blacks alike, and her lack of a husband during her travels made her highly influential. Alice Paul spent her entire life fighting for equal rights, and even wrote a new amendment to both men and women equal rights in the 1920s, but it was never ratified.
So now, our new speaker for today is Margaret. What was the woman's impact on the American life?
Well, the women's suffrage movement paved the way for modern feminism. Ratification of the 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote, as previously mentioned by Mary. But it did not change either women's lives or U.S. politics as much as suffragists had hoped. When soldiers returned from the war, women were looking for a fun time, not the old structure of society. Women in the 20s learned to value their individuality. Women were divided throughout the period by aspirations, class, or race. Sadly, most of the new liberties were only enjoyed by white, middle, and upper class women. Women of poorer classes remained tied to the past. However, for those with some wealth, a whole new world opened up. These freedoms were all thanks to previous suffragists like Elizabeth Canton. Although during this time, flappers tore down social barriers and challenged the double standard. Women of this period challenged traditional views on sexuality with the help of psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud. Flappers saw themselves as sexual beings with the same impulses as men. They went on unchaperoned dates and dated more than one man.
What about the workforce?
The United States Department of Labor created the Women's Bureau on June 5th, 1920. It formed policies and standards to support working women. At this time, only about 20% of the total workforce contained women. The percentage of married women who worked in 1920 was 4 to 5% in 1890, but increased to 9% by 1920.
And what about the change in education?
Women attended universities in greater numbers. They fought against the belief that women who attended college ended up as old maids. They also challenged the old boys club belief that women's brains couldn't handle advanced learning, and attended the co-ed halls of higher education, competing with their male peers.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you guys for joining our webcast today. Until the next episode.